This is Wednesday, June 17, our video conference meeting, and I've got to read the statement beforehand, make sure that we are compliant. So I've confirmed with Town Council that tonight's meeting has been convened in accordance with the Governor's March 13, 2020 Executive Order 202.1, which suspends certain provisions of the Open Meetings Law to allow a municipal board to convene a meeting via video conferencing. In accordance with the executive order, the public has been provided with the ability to view and hear tonight's meeting at their risk, and a transcript will be provided at a later date. I have done a roll call of the board members, and there's a quorum present for this meeting. I've also confirmed that this meeting has been duly noticed. A link has been provided so that the public can view and participate in the meeting. Furthermore, a video of this conference will be made available on public access TV and the town's website. As always, the agenda and all materials considered for tonight's meeting are available for viewing on the town's website. Anyway, we are set to go. So our first matter is an informal appearance before the board. This is for the Meadow Hill subdivisions, lots 1 and 2. This is an application for a site development plan approval, wetlands and stormwater permits for lots 1 and lots 2. As we discussed before we got going with the meeting, we'll take these applications sequentially. So we will consider lots 1 and lot 2 separately. There may in fact be some discussion. In fact, I think Dennis Corelli's memo blends both. So as necessary, we'll have joint discussion over the 2 lots, but I think at least from the outset, we'll look at each of these separately. Okay, is the applicant's here, I think, right? I saw.
Good evening.
Alan.
Alan Pilch is here on behalf of Meadow Hill. Can you hear me?
Yes, yes. Mm-hmm.
Excellent. Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the Planning Board. I'll give a brief introduction just to the entire project of the development of these 2 lots, because it is 2 lots within a subdivision that was approved, let's say 14 years ago or 16 years ago. So, let me share the screen, perhaps this may help. Are you able to see that?
Yes.
Yep.
So this is, on the bottom left is the Meadow Hill subdivision, which is a 5-lot subdivision located of the lot that was located at 643 King Street. The property is in the R1A district. I'll just briefly say the subdivision was approved for wetland, steep slope, and tree removal in 2004 as Placid subdivision, and with an amended approval in April 18th of 2006. And after Unicorn Contracting purchased the property, there was an application for a final subdivision resolution amendment, integrated plot plan amendment, wetlands permit amendment, steep slope permit amendment, and that was granted on April 16th, 2014 as the Meadow Hill subdivision. And I'll just say construction of 3 of the 5 lots has been completed. I don't know if you can see the mouse on the screen. I don't know if you can see that at all. But,
Yep.
There's lot 3, lot 4, and lot 5 have been constructed. And the subject is really about lot number 1, which is the center lot, the former estate, if you will, or the large house that was here, and lot number 2, which is the entire eastern portion of the subdivision. I'll just briefly mention too that it was also subject of a stormwater pollution prevention plan, which was approved by New York City DEP on November 25th, 2014. And a number of the stormwater management practices have been constructed, including a stormwater basin on lot number 2 here, on a second one on lot number 2 over here. And there are some other practices, some infiltration facilities on lots 3, 4, and 5, and a rain garden actually just at Meadow Hill Way, which is the cul-de-sac, which provides access to lots 1, 2, and 3, and North Place, which is actually at the bottom of the screen here. This is King Street over here. If you'd like, I can just start briefly on lot number 1. So it's proposed to construct a single family house on this 3.726 acre property. Lot number 1, again, is on the west side of Meadow Hill Way, which is the cul-de-sac which provides access. The house will be located in I'll call it the north central location of the property, generally in the same location as the prior house. And access to the house will be obtained from a new driveway from the cul-de-sac of Meadow Hill Way. And I'll just say the house has been very carefully sited to preserve the trees. There's treed areas that are present on the property. There's a treed area here between this lot and lot number 3 to the north. That's completely remaining. There's a treed area which had a clearing grading limit line around it in the original approval on the eastern portion of the lot between this and Meadow Hill Way. That's not being touched. And there's a treed area also along the southern property line. There's actually a fence line along here. And there's a treed area here in the southern portion of the lot, and that's also not being touched. I'll just briefly say too that the building coverage and development coverage is less than what was approved. I know I noted in the letter of 2004, but it's also less than what was shown on the plans in 2014 as well. It was kind of interesting that the approval resolution of 2014 did not specify the building coverage and development coverage for lots 1 and 2. It wasn't there. But that being said, the building coverage being proposed now is 5,247 square feet. The prior one in 2014 was 6,015 square feet, so it's about 800 square feet less. And development coverage for lot 1 in 2014 was 15,264 square feet, and currently, what's being shown on this plan is 10,692 square feet. So it is substantially less.
Alan, what was the square footage of the existing house before it was demolished? Do you recall? That was a very substantial house.
Yeah, I'd have to look that up. I'm sorry, I don't have it right now, but I could show you. This may show some of it. This is the comparison of the setbacks, actually. But the proposed house is here, and the former house is the shaded one.
Yeah.
So it's actually, I guess it looks like it's fairly similar. You know, it was large because it's spread over a large area. Where
Right.
This is much more compact. But that's what was there previously. And you can see also, it's essentially the proposed house being here is essentially in the, it's roughly in the same location as the former house.
Yep.
They sort of overlap each other, if you will. And I'll just briefly mention too, that this is the grading and utilities plan for lot number 1. There's water supplied by the public water supply on there's a line that's running up Meadow Hill Way, and water to the house will be brought that way. And there's a sanitary sewer. There's a manhole which begins an easement on lot number 3, is conveyed down through lot number 1, and actually goes to Old Lime Road. But, and we'll just connect into that existing sanitary sewer on the property. And that's kind of like that's kind of like the overall view of the development on lot number 1. I did see, if you want, we can talk about the comments that we received from the town planner and the town engineer, or if you want, we can go to lot 2 and talk about that.
Well, I think, Sabrina, why don't you tackle your comments in your memo, and then Bob, and then Dennis, and then
Sure.
See if there are any issues in connection with these.
So I'm just going to summarize, because I think that everybody received a copy of my memo. The applicant received a copy. I think that the biggest thing, Alan, is you spoke of the 2014 approval. That resolution referenced coverage calculation worksheets for each of these lots. And so we would just need you to kind of submit those worksheets for comparison purposes. I believe you that this coverage is probably less, both from a building perspective and expanded development coverage, which would then make it compliant. Exactly. So we just need you to submit the 2014 numbers because those were referenced in the resolution as well as the figure. And to really, provide that for the record. The plan as it's shown is zoning compliant. I think the only consideration is that right now there is a lot of grassed area, a lot of open space on the property. They specifically drew the clearing and grading limit line to protect some of the natural vegetation that is there or the previously planted vegetation that is there. The planning board may want to consider bringing in that clearing and grading limit line a little bit closer to the actual area of disturbance during construction. But that's a thought for the planning board to discuss. Other than that, it's a type 2 action under SECRA, and it meets all of the zoning requirements to be in compliance.
Good. Okay, thank you. Alan, can you show us where, I don't think you're proposing any additional grading, but I think you are proposing more open area for maintenance of a lawn in the clearing area. Where could you designate that on the map, and you should just show us where that is?
Let me point out, I'll just show the aerial, if I may.
Sure.
This is lot number 1 over here. Can you see that?
Yep.
I'm kind of just
Yes.
outlining it here. And you can see the old house, which was there. The driveway came in this way, and it actually went up through this part of the lot, went down through lot number 4. Sorry. And so this wooded area between here and lot number 1 and lot number 3 is actually going to remain in its entirety. This wooded area here, which was to be preserved from the original Placid subdivision, is still there, and it'll remain. And there's a wooded area here along the southern property line. You can see the old tennis court that was here that's been removed. And this is also going to remain. And where the clearing grading limit line was drawn was essentially along the fence line here by the old tennis court, came up through here by the wooded area. And the rest of the lawn, as you can see, is just some trees, scattered trees and lawn. So the idea was to sort of retain, if you will, that, I don't want to say estate-like setting for this lot, but there aren't any other real constraints here. It's all basically a manicured lawn. So there's no grading, there's no clearing of trees that are occurring, but it's essentially just to be able to manage these lawn areas. Because if we don't manage these lawn areas, what's likely going to happen is it will get invaded by invasive plants, probably like burning bush and barberry and things like this. But if it's managed as a lawn, which it currently is, then it can be maintained that way, exactly as it was back in 2004 and probably even before that as well. So that's the reason why the clearing grading limit line was shown as it, is on this sheet. Basically, this is really the fence line along the south. This is the wooded area here. This is the wooded area here in the eastern portion of the property. This is the wooded area here on the northern portion of the property between this and lot number 3. This is the old driveway, so the clearing, the clearing basically removes the driveway, the portions of it that remain. And this basically, the sanitary sewer runs through here. That's where it is. And so you want to have access to that too. If it becomes invaded with vegetation, invasives, it becomes difficult to maintain. So that's the reason why this line is actually drawn this way. So you will have access into the easement for maintenance of the sanitary sewer. You can see here, it's the old fence line. So kind of like where it came.
So Alan, is it possible, Alan, for you to put the clearing and grading limit line on, for example, this plan, so that, and I think that, we need to understand more of the vegetation, but really to make sure that, it's clearly delineated in regards to what you're proposing.
Okay. Well, I just
For
put on
instance,
the erosion sediment control plan, which I'm hoping you could see.
Mm-hmm.
And that line, which is limited disturbance, which is really not a disturbance line. It's really, I'll call it the clearing grading limit line. And as I say, there's no clearing and there's no grading in this area. There's
Right.
no clearing of trees. There's no grading that's occurring. But it's really just to continue to manage the lawn area, which is presently here. So, so the sanitary sewer easement remains open. The wooded area here is protected. The wooded area here is protected, and the wooded area here is also protected. And basically it's lawn all the way. There's a fence line along here on the south.
We got it, Alan. So,
Yeah, and that's it. So that was
Are
the,
there, Alan, are there any significant trees in the wood, in the lawn area that are currently is not in the clearing in the line, but once you move that line, those significant trees become inside the line where they could be taken down? That maybe we would need to identify and protect?
there are a couple of trees here beside the driveway. There are a couple of trees here on the to the west of the new house, or west of the old house that was there. And that's really about it. So those trees, if you wanted to protect, you could. They're mature trees.
so I don't, it seems to me, maybe I'm wrong about this, but our tree ordinance probably, protects those adequately. I could be wrong about that. But the observation I'd make is that you could almost say that this is a historic meadow. I mean, the building which was there, I guess it's been demolished now, which was essentially an estate sort of quality architecture with an estate feeling to the grounds, including the approach on the driveway coming up with the alley of trees. And while I think we would generally agree that we all live in a forest here, these meadows, I think, are also an asset to the community, a visual asset, and in this particular case, maybe even a historic one. So I agree with the desire to have what would maybe otherwise we would see as a very generous grading and clearing limit line, but in this case, I think it's probably warranted. And Alan's right, that gives the property owner the opportunity to maintain it that way.
I think then we have to make sure that when we grant it, if we do, that we clearly say that this is an exception to what we normally do because it already is meadow / lawn. And further, I'll throw in that, the mature trees that are up by the house, Alan, you gave me the feeling that you were going to knock those down. I hope not, because if they're mature trees, then you have to revise the application. And losing mature trees I don't like that. I think that if they're really nice, it's sort of like at the Cupola building at Reader's Digest. There are 2 oak trees, I think they are, that have been there for 100 years almost.
Right.
So they look nice.
Yeah, I apologize if we sort of thought that these trees were coming down. It is not.
They're good.
They're not. I
Okay.
know there's one tree here that's listed as number 317 that is within the footprint of the driveway, if you will. I actually was there on Monday to go take a look myself. Tree number 317 is no longer here. So I just say there are no trees on this lot which are proposed to be removed. And it's not necessary.
Yeah. Dennis, did you have some thoughts on this? You were out there to study it. Yeah, I think you had some thoughts and some requirements or requests regarding some of the trees and designations.
Yes, I think that if we're able to kind of go back in time just so that I could see what was submitted or what those numbers and hashtags correspond to, I think the discussions that we're having would really kind of be funneled down to specifics versus, is this one coming down? Is it not? And I just wanted to make sure that, as Alan just pointed out, I had no context for seeing if a tree was there and now wasn't there. I'm just looking, at the numbers and the hashtags, and I was able to, I think, correlate to some and not others. So I just want clarity on that. And then also too, getting to, which may be premature, but I think everybody was sort of moving in that direction with respect to a discussion about a landscape plan. Because to me, there's a difference between, it's going to be maintained as a lawn, but someone wants the lawn to be, a sod farm pallet monoculture versus we're just going to mow this existing mix of grass and wildflower species, which you can do. And to Alan's point, yes, if you want to maintain a meadow, that, is definitely necessary. You can't just let it go, so to speak. But in the absence of those plans, there's nothing to direct as to how that's all going to happen going forward. So those were my basic comments for lot 1, just so that I can get that specificity down.
Okay, good.
To that, I'm sorry, Bob, for a second here.
Sure, please.
Dennis, to your point, we're using the term meadow here, and I know I introduced that term, and that can have both just sort of a general meaning, but also can relate to ground cover species. And I just wonder if when you are talking about meadow, Dennis, you're talking about more natural materials as opposed to lawn.
Yes, I'm talking about not only the composition, but in this case, from what I observed, frequency or lack thereof of a mowing. So it really doesn't appear as like a maintained cover, whether it be turf cover or turf and wildflower species mixed cover, but it's both. It's definitely species and maintenance or lack thereof.
Your primary concern is unless I'm mistaken, I just want to be sure I understand. Your primary concern is that it actually be maintained as a meadow / lawn.
That I would have no objection to that, but I just want some clarity if that's the intention
Got
of
it.
the applicant.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, and the applicant can tell us, and provide that information for the next time we look at this or we go to public. Good. Bob, you had some comments, technical comments, I believe, on lot 1?
Yes, sir. Good evening, everyone. Basically, ST1, I'll just key on the more important ones, I would imagine. The report, what it was done, preceded the new updates in the extreme precipitation tables. So the applicant should prepare a new report based on the new flow, which went from 7 inches up to 9.23 inches for the 100-year storm. And all the ones from the 1 to the 100 should be shown as well. That's ST1. Another important item, unfortunately, this DEP approval was granted in November 24th, 2014. They're only good for 5 years. Obviously, that's about 6 years, 7 months ago. So the applicant should obtain DEP approval for a time extension regarding the SWIP as well. That's ST4. GC1, Sabrina hit on this, and this is a topic of discussion. They will be increasing the grading limits lines from 53,560 up to 101,84. That's about 189 increase, but I believe that the planning board is inclined to approve the amended clearing and recommend that they submit a declaration regarding the amended clearing grading and an associated map with that to be attached there too. The other ones are just standard ones. One item I did see we don't have and I can't find. If the applicant can give us it, it would be great. GC7. Back then, there were so many easements on this property that had to be amended. They prepared a separate map for the easements alone. And I don't know if we ever got the filed map on that. If the applicant can provide us with the filed map that was filed in the county, Westchester County Division of Land Records, that would be greatly appreciated. Of course, they'll need a sewer connection permit for the connection for the sanitary sewer. 2, 3, 4, and 5 are technical items, which are just typos and not really typos, but just drafting things you have to put on. And last but not least, GC8 are general notes we like to see on the plans to cover all the bases as well. And that is the end of my comments.
In connection with the clearing and grading limit line, if we're so disposed to extend it to what the applicant wants, Nick and Sabrina, is it appropriate to grant the clearing and grading limit lines, but to put conditions in there that state that the clearing and grading limit line is being extended solely for the maintenance of the lawn/meadow, and that no grading or clearing of trees can take place without coming back to the planning board?
Well, you can put that all in, I believe, Nick can speak on this
Yes.
better than I, or Jen, who does these, I believe, Nicholas. I believe that language could be incorporated into the declaration, Nicholas.
No, correct. I would put it in the resolution as well as the declaration, but yes, the board has that authority to do so. Just because you're granting an extension of it doesn't mean it's unlimited. You can, if there's a relationship to the concerns and goals and objectives of the board, then it's appropriate to do so. Just document the reasons why, and we can draft that language.
Now, what I'd recommend too, guys, the clearing and grading is a clearing and grading. Evidently, that's going to remain just to go around the limits that were already developed, grass and lawn, whatever the planning board decides to do. But there is some grading being done where they get about a 4, 5, 6 foot cut for the driveway. I mean, if the planning board is inclined to do it, just for more protection during construction, they can call it a construction limit line during construction. So that's going to go around the building that will actually be disturbed, where the soil will be disturbed and considered a land development activity if the planning board wishes to do that.
I like that.
I would like that, and I would like the additional protection, going back to one of Dick's comments earlier on. I think it gives us the boots and straps here to hold it, to provide us with a little bit more protection. And make it clear as a distinction to Dick's point that this is an unusual situation and distinguished from others. I think my time was up, the bell rang.
Just like in chess.
Alan, any issues, questions, problems with any of this?
Well, I'll just make mention that I did discuss the stormwater comments with the town engineer on Monday and on Tuesday. And I believe we agreed that, I know he noted in his memo that the analysis should be at the 4 design points from the Meadow Hill subdivision. But the only design points that will be impacted by the development of lot 1 and 2 are really design point 1, which is Meadow Hill Way at North Place, and design point 2, which is at the northeast corner, on the northerly property line, the northeast corner of the property. It's 2A. There's another design point here, which was analyzed as part of Meadow Hill. And another one here was also analyzed as part of Meadow Hill. But because all the drainage, all the runoff from lot number 1 is going to be carried in an easterly direction into the existing basin, and all of lot number 2 drains this way, I believe we agreed that it would not be necessary for us, since there's no change going on. There's no new runoff going off to these other 2 design points at the northwest corner and southwest corner to analyze, to do a full analysis on something that has not been modified. And it already has been, I'll use the term, approved by granting, if you will, the certificates of occupancy for lot number 3, which drains in this direction, the good portion of it, and all of 4 and 5, which drain in that direction. That was the only other comment we had.
I do agree with Alan's approach, and it makes perfect sense.
Okay, great.
That was it.
Okay. Okay.
I have one last question. Is the amount of trees along the cul-de-sac going to be the same as originally offered? Because in one drawing, Alan, it looked like, a third of the trees had disappeared.
There's no change in it at all. And there were a number of trees that were to be planted from the original subdivision, under chapter 121. And also there were some trees there were done for the New York City DEP approval as well. So, there's no change in that being proposed.
Well, it's when I start here at the beginning of the cul-de-sac, of the sac part of the cul, that there's only 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 trees shown there. And when I do it, off one of the old drawings, it looks like there's 11 or 12.
Right. I think, Mr. Brown, I think what I'll have to do is update the drawing just to show what existing trees are actually there, because they are there. I guess they weren't shown on the the base survey drawing, which I used.
All right, that would be good, because then if these
Sure.
are new trees added to the old ones where there are gaps, then that makes perfect sense,
Sure, we shall do that.
as someone just said.
Okay,
Alan,
Yes.
I've got a question about the drive.
Yes.
It looks like there are, well, first of all, it looks like the residents, unless I'm mistaken, well, let me ask a question. The two cars that are shown along the drive, are those intended to be for visitor parking, or how would those be used?
Well, there is a garage, obviously, on the
Right, I
north
see that.
I suppose it's really just to show it's for visitor parking.
So I have two observations. One is, I mean, I don't know, but in such a house like this on this property, I guess it's obviously up to the residents, but to every time you come to your house to actually come through the garage to go into the house, I mean, I'm not sure that people necessarily always behave that way. They don't always put their car in the garage, especially in a location like this where there's plenty of property just to keep your car on the driveway. But the other part of it is that it doesn't look as though on that driveway there's a way for a car to get out to turn around, other than going all the way to the back and using a hammerhead. And I'm not sure you can use a hammerhead that effectively unless you're coming out of the garage. So I'm curious as to whether how that works, and if it doesn't work, if there's a modification to the plan that either needs to be done, or there will be some future modification to the driveway after this thing gets built.
Okay. It's something we can look at. If
Thank
that's
you.
all right with you. Sure. Thank you.
I have a
Okay.
question about the road, about Meadow Hill Way.
Sure.
Is that public or private?
It's a private road.
Okay. Is there any was there any I mean, is it planned to be gated or closed off, or any restrictions to it in any way?
No, there are none.
Okay. And is that excuse my ignorance, but is I guess Sabrina or Bob, I mean, is that forbidden here, or is that something that can be undertaken by the applicant?
A gate?
Yeah.
I believe if they come back to a gate, they'd have to come back to the planning board for their approval.
Okay.
Yes.
But they could put a gate. It'd be up to the discretion of the planning board.
Very good.
They can put up signs saying cul-de-sac dead end. You know, that's the way, I think it's Heathcote and Howden, at least one of those two roads are set up.
Yes.
They could also
Sure, they-
Yes.
Yeah, they can do that. It's a private road. It was never designed to be a town road. It's always going to be a private road. So if they want to put those signs up, that's all their right.
Yeah, they could also put up a sign that says private road.
That is correct.
Yeah,
Yes.
Very good.
okay. Should we go on to lot number 2? Which I
okay.
think is easier, less activity, less changes.
There's one person, Jeffrey Gugic, that has his hand up. I don't know.
Yeah,
He's one of the panelists. I don't know.
Oh,
what-
sure.
Yeah.
yeah, hi, thank you. My wife and I and family live at 20 North Place, so that is on the map. Yeah, right.
This lot.
I guess I would just like to echo the comments about the trees. Many of the trees on this property are beautiful specimen trees, that should be preserved. I've been told that the previous owners of this house took special care and brought some of these trees in from special places. So that's one comment. Another comment is on the south border, there's a stockade fence that we've erected, and there's poison ivy and other ivies that are sort of growing up over the fence. When we talk about sort of maintaining meadow-like conditions, I would assume that is not consistent with meadow conditions. I just wanted to make sure that's the case.
Poison ivy, you mean?
Yeah, poison ivy and just other kinds of ivies and thorn bushes. I'm unfortunately, I'm not educated as to all the different names of the, of these bushes or growths.
Well, you're in good company right now. Dennis Corelli is probably the person that knows most about different genera. And so, Dennis, if you
Sure.
want to pipe in too, that's fine.
Sure. Well, I would say the erection of a fence probably promotes some of that ivy growth. So the maintaining of a meadow, I don't think about putting a fence through it. So I wouldn't worry from that perspective. I didn't see any poison ivy as I was traversing the area that I recall. And as far as, and I think I was commenting on this before, that's a meadow needs some form of maintenance to prevent that, which would be a natural succession at some point, to go from a meadow community to advance to something a little bit more woody. So if it's maintained as a meadow, you would almost inhibit, I'll say, the propagation. I'm not going to go so far as to say there won't be a single species of a thorny shrub that's trying to get started, but the mowing, even periodic, would prevent, the advancement, propagation, community of that establishing. So it's, as I said, it's not a walk away and watch the flowers. There is some level of maintenance and input that's required to maintain that.
So
We'll have a maintenance plan for the vegetation, I'm sure.
can I ask a question here? Because I'm starting to typically, for me, get a little confused here. The clearing and grading limit lines are drawn to describe a boundary beyond which one is not allowed to clear or grade, and I think with certain exceptions for maintenance against invasive species. The activity within the clearing and grading limit line, however, is essentially unlimited unless the grading gets to the point somebody wants to come in and regrade. They're allowed to do it as long as I think they don't go beyond the standards that we set. They're allowed to not mow if they choose to. They're allowed to put trees in if they want to. So while we talked about the existing meadow as being a historic, what one could say, if you wanted to go this far, a historic feature, which maybe should be maintained to the benefit of the community, that doesn't mean that it has to be, unless we're saying that it has to be in this particular case. I'm confused whether we are saying that it has to be maintained as a meadow, because that wasn't my intent.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So, so when you get to the question of vines and some of these things that you may be seeing on the fence are things that I imagine that some of them, maybe most of them, are in that category of invasive species. Whether they're inside or outside the clearing and grading limit line, I think one would be encouraged to go and take care of that and do that kind of maintenance.
Did we answer your question, Jeffrey?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, very good. Anyone else? If not, shall we move over now to lot number 2?
Please.
So lot number 2, as I point out, lot number 2 is a 5.2 acre property. It covers the entire eastern portion of the lot. A good portion of it, I don't have the number in front of me, is actually part of a conservation easement. Oops, let me see if I know this. So a good portion of the entire lot is part of a conservation easement. I'll have to show you the easement map. And a wetland is also present in the eastern portion of this property as well. I'll just point out too that there are 2 stormwater drainage basins which were also constructed on lot number 2. Let me just go back then here. So on lot number 2, I'll just say it's generally in the same location as a prior house of what was approved in 2014, which I'll show afterwards. This house, though, on lot number 2 is smaller in size than the house that was previously approved, or the development coverage that was previously approved in 2014, again by a substantial amount. The building coverage in 2014 was 5,490 square feet. This building coverage is 3,749 square feet. Maybe it reflects what the market is these days. And development coverage in 2014 was 9,480 square feet. This is 6,333 square feet. So it is substantially less. And again, this gives the coverages, and I'll just sort of so, and this shows the proposed house where it is, and the former house was to be located essentially here. So this is smaller in size by a substantial amount, but the former house, what was proposed in 2014, is that line, and this is the proposed house here. So it is essentially in the same footprint as what was proposed previously. Again, with this lot, which has certain constraints on it because of wetland buffers, which is located there, the 100-foot buffer. There is an easement for access to stormwater management basin number 2. So this house essentially got located in the essentially the same footprint as the prior house. It will also be served with water from Meadow Way, and for sanitary sewer, there is a force main which is proposed, which will convey the wastewater to the existing manhole on lot number 3, and then down through lot number 1. And then with regard to the clearing grading limit line, this one is actually quite a bit less in size than what was done in 2014, because the clearing grading limit line in 2014 had included the construction of the 2 basins, which is really located here. There's a stormwater management basin. There's another stormwater management basin here. So this one is less. It does include some areas up to the north here as well, where there's really no grading or clearing going on, but again, it's for maintenance of the landscape there, for control of invasive plants, things like that.
Alan, who has the responsibility for maintaining these basins? Is it just the ownership of lot 2, or is this an HOA requirement? My recollection is an HOA requirement, because, it serves lot 3, lot number 1, and lot number 2. Okay, and do we have a maintenance program on file for those basins?
I will find that out and let you know.
May I say something? Those are all filed and required prior to the signing of the plat years ago. They've all been filed down in the county with control numbers, so they're all on record. And it clearly explains and details out who's responsible for what, when, and where.
Okay. And do we have, Bob, the profiles of the construction, what these things will look like? Are they going to be barren? Are they going to be landscaped? I don't recall 2014.
There was a landscaping plan, which I had shown, and I attached it to my memo. They didn't really attach it to this plan set, but it is for your information, and that should be shown on this set. And it's a pretty comprehensive planting plan that shows mitigation for the wetlands and also plantings for the stormwater basins as well.
Right.
Good. Yeah.
Yeah, well, and I will say that they are planted, these areas of the basin. Actually, this one, there's a lot of Typholatifolia, which is growing up, bulrush, which is growing up in here. And there a lot of the original plan, which showed wetland plantings in the wetland itself, were actually moved closer with the approval of Steve Coleman back then, closer into the, so it wouldn't disturb the wetland. We actually moved closer in towards the basins just to provide more screening for it, but they actually have been installed. The plant materials under that former approval.
Okay.
And you know, that's and I say the and I know what there were comments from the town engineer with respect to portions of this lot as well. I'd be happy
Right.
to discuss that as well at this time.
Sabrina, is there anything that you want to cover from your memo? Anything that stands out that we need to draw
It's
attention
really
to?
this, it's really, again, this lot is zoning compliant. The applicant needs to provide the 2014 documentation so that we can verify that there is, that the coverages are in compliance. But from a planning perspective, this lot matches what was previously determined by the planning board. Thank you, Alan.
No, I have them all here. It's just
Yeah, and again, this is a type 2 action in accordance with seeker, so there's no further environmental review required.
Okay. Bob, anything special you want to point out in your memo or specifically for this lot?
Most of these are mimic what was on lot 1. However, there is one concern I have, which I mentioned in ST3, that in 2018, there were some issues we had with stormwater runoff, which Alan was kind enough to do some interim plan back then, which showed additional swales and berms, which was an ingenious idea. However, this plan shows them being eliminated. I would highly recommend that they be put back in place. That berm swale along the north side of the lot. You can see semblances. Would you be kind enough to show that where that is, Alan?
yeah, it's actually located through this axis, if you will. But as you can also see, this is the access easement to the basin. So I think what we'll do is we will relocate it to the north of the access easement and basically direct the flow into the basin. And this way we'll have the access, through the driveway or even through the easement to maintain the basin as per the original approval. And this relocated berm, which will be placed up here to the north of the easement, will then direct the flow into the basin.
And if I may say another add, I'm going to defer to Nick on this. These two swale berms, which they do have, if you note, there's one on the south side too. And if you note, these are not going to be in an easement. But what happens if they're not in an easement and the homeowners don't know about it? And I've seen it happen in 2 or 3 rain gardens in town. They sell this property off to another homeowner. They don't know what these swales are for. And what do? The landscapers come in and cover them up. And then we have nothing. So I would highly recommend that there be at least a declaration prepared which memorializes these 2 swale berms to make certain that the homeowner knows about it and make certain that they're not covered in during landscaping operations to make the house look nice.
Good. Sounds good.
Yeah, Bob, good idea. We'll work with you on that.
And that was my biggest difference between lot 1 and lot 2. And
Right.
that ends my
Thank you.
comments.
Right. Dennis, did you have anything you wanted to add to lot 2 that we didn't cover in lot 1?
I'd say the concept of what Bob is speaking about, I just, and I know I'm new to this project, but, in the buffer, there's already shrubs planted and I didn't know, is that mitigation for the entire subdivision? Is it, and it, to me, just becomes significant as to, for that 1/10 of an acre that you're proposing is lawn, essentially lawn. I just wanted some clarity as to what restrictions that area may have in terms of, well, it can't function as this because it was designated as that. And also too, I mean, if those shrubs were planted as part of mitigation, I would just have some concerns moving forward that if it's going to be maintained as a lawn, then, I just see as, a landscaper would perform, you're going to mow as close as you can. And then the weed whacker just starts hitting the bottom of the woody material. And, over time, those shrubs could be compromised. So I was just focusing on that area in terms of, wanting to understand if it is a mitigation area and look to sort of promote and protect that going forward instead of manipulating it in a way. And then outside of that area, again, just protective of shrubs that are planted along the fence line, because I just assumed they were planted for a reason and you would want them to continue to sort of grow and if maybe propagate, as opposed to kind of like to Bob's point, like, okay, well, we want to do something different now. And well, if you can do something different, that's fine. But if you can't, I just wanted it clear.
Okay,
So that,
Good.
what the purpose was basically for those plantings that happened when they did.
right.
You know what I'd
Okay, Alan,
recommend?
we can look
Excuse
at
me.
that.
Know what I'd recommend, guys, if to help Dennis's clarification on this project, Alan, as a recommendation, why don't you show the mitigation plan that was approved years ago, when they came back in 2014, and superimpose it over here to make certain that the grading that you're doing isn't going to interfere with the planting plan that was approved back then, just to give Dennis a better idea and the planning board a better idea of the impacts or no impacts.
Yeah. That's fine.
That's a great idea.
Yeah. The planting areas were actually like along here, this very edge. And most of it was on the other side of the basin.
Right.
That's where it was. So it's really, and it was also located out here. So, but I'll provide that clarification.
Thank you.
with
Thank
regard to
you,
that.
Alan.
That's a good point, Bob. That's a very
Good,
good point.
thank you.
Sure.
Anyone else, anything?
Yeah, Alan, would you do me a favor and bring up the drawing that compares the two grading and clearing limit lines? Yeah, so the black one is, the red one is, let's see, the black one is the proposed one,
The red one is 2014.
right?
The black one is 2020.
So there's a modification on the northern property line that takes the clearing and grading limit line right up to it. I think that, unless I'm mistaken, I remember going through this years ago, but I think that the intent of the red line, the original one, was to be sure that there would be some natural buffer between the cleared area of this lot and the lot to the north. And it looks to me that we no longer have that protection. If there are good reasons for that line to be moved, I'd be happy to hear them. But in addition to what I'd recommend, if we're going to go ahead and grant that we need to be sure that we are doing some landscape treatment up there that does provide a buffer.
Right. That's fine. I think we'll provide more clarification on that line
Okay.
for you. No, I
That's a good
appreciate
point. That's a good point, Tom. I can remember public comments on this application from neighbors up there, and they were some concern about vegetative buffering up there.
That's fine.
So thank you, Alan, for that
Yeah, we'll provide
clarification.
clarification on that as well.
Yep.
We'll see where the new berm, if you will, comes. We constructed the berm basically as a very interim measure, on this lot in order to handle a drainage situation which we were encountering. So I'll have to see where this new berm comes with regard to that clearing line, but that's fine. And we'll provide clarification of where the existing trees are here, because we don't want to take any trees down. That's the whole point. So
Good.
we'll provide clarification on that.
Thank you.
Sure.
Alan, can you put up the plan that shows the driveway, please?
Of this lot?
Yes, of this lot, the proposed
Sure.
driveway.
Yes, just one more. I assume you mean in plan view.
Yeah, that's perfect. Just a question from the board. Isn't it kind of our preference not to have the garage doors face the street? or since this is a private road, it's not as critical?
Good question. That certainly is our preference.
And this looks like it'd be 3 garage doors facing the street. So I thought maybe because it was private, that's why it was cited this way, but I'm just not sure if that was the thinking or not.
I'm guessing that the concern you're voicing, Greg, probably wasn't even taken into consideration. It just seemed as though, I'm guessing that this was, maybe we could look at the original subdivision. What did that building look like?
Because, lot 1, it looks like it was definitely done on purpose because the driveway had a big swing. So that's why that's what caught my eye.
Yeah, good question. So what was approved originally?
I think in the original one, the garage was probably located on this face of the building. This is in the plan of the 2014 house. My recollection is it was along this axis.
So access to the driveway then was higher up on the must have been higher up on the cul-de-sac and came
Oh,
around.
definitely. Yes, it was up in this area.
Right. That's a good point, Greg.
There was also a large pool back here as well. On the former.
That's right.
So Greg, there's a threshold question here, whether it's as important an issue for a private road as we might consider it to be for a public one.
Well, I think it being a private road, not meeting town standards, is part of it. Is part of the conclusion as you raised it. I think also the way the driveway curves, there is an opportunity to plant some trees, that would break up that view for those people who were offended by it when they're spinning around in the cul-de-sac. But there's room, to plant some trees, which might be nice anyway, just to keep more privacy there.
Just for the board's information, I pulled up the old plan in 2014 and Alan's correct. It did come in on the side.
Yeah, on the north face of the building.
That is correct.
And so it was there for probably a shorter driveway as well because it came
That
in.
is correct.
High.
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, yes, I agree with Dick Brownell that there certainly is an opportunity to do some planting in this area.
Yeah.
There already are some trees that are planted here, but there's an opportunity to plant something else in here that would provide some filtering.
Yeah. But I got to tell you, when you look at the architectural rendering, the elevation of the front elevation, the garage probably
It's all garage.
It takes up 40% of the front. It's very substantial. I leave it to the taste police, the architects, what they think.
Alan, what was the reason for bringing the driveway in so close to the meadow, the word meadow, and not leaving it where it was up top before?
It was really for grade purposes.
Grade? Okay.
Yes. Because
So I'm assuming that there's less cutting when you do it down here?
there is a fair amount of grade change between here and this location there. So the reason for doing that, let me just sort of move this over here, if you will, is that there's 2, 4, 6, 8, it's like 10 feet of grade change between here, let's say, and there. And so in order to do that, it was really necessary to have a more gentle slope. So that's kind of like what was the genesis of it.
What are those dotted lines up there? Is that a pre-existing pathway or road that was there?
This is the easement line for maintenance.
Okay.
So the idea would be, if that's what it was, how it was developed. So I mean, if somebody was coming in for maintenance, they could do this.
Well, Alan, just hold it right there. Hold it right up, right there. Thank you.
Sure.
So let's talk about grades for a minute, because it looks as though the cul-de-sac is currently at what else? Is it 660?
Right, there's a 660 contour which runs.
Right, there's
here.
660. And the garage floor is at 656?
6, yeah, that's.
So it's
correct.
4 feet.
Right, I mean, I suppose, okay, but but there are some grades through here where, you know, I'll just say there is some fill that's going on here. So that was, I think too, I see what you're saying there. I understood.
Now, I don't know what that would mean. If just to talk about an alternative, doesn't necessarily have to be the answer here, but just what it would mean. If you did come in higher up on the cul-de-sac, you'd have a shorter driveway and you could arrange the garage entry as is on the original proposal for the subdivision approval. But the question then, how would that affect the drainage that you've got this drainage easement going around? I'm sorry, it's not a drainage easement, it's a access maintenance
easement.
But could you still handle the drainage around the building if you move the driveway up there?
Mean to come in this way, like in that
Yeah,
direction?
if you came, I don't have control, but if you came in where it says 2-inch cherry at the top of the cul-de-sac. Yeah, there.
Here,
And you just sort of came in and then did a left into the garage. I think that's pretty much what it was in the original plan.
into this direction.
Yeah.
It would require to modify, if you will, the access easement to the basin.
Yeah, but it wouldn't prevent you from doing such a thing, right?
I don't believe so.
Okay.
Hey, Greg, and anyone else on the board, historically, the concern about having garages face the street on public streets is what? Is it just an aesthetics thing? Is it a privacy thing?
It's aesthetics.
Okay.
It's primarily aesthetics. If I can, and it's a little bit more than that. It is aesthetics, and that's part of it. The other part of it is when you have a garage, the front of a garage where the garage doors are, you end up with a pad of asphalt or gravel or whatever it would be, and more often than not, you have cars parked there in front of the garage. Many times, it's very common for people to end up using the garage for storage, and the cars end up there outside anyway. And so you end up with the consequence of that is you end up with cars being parked in the front yard. And that's one of the consequences of that kind of a site plan. Whereas if you swing it, you get it on the side of the building or behind the building, that doesn't become, obviously doesn't become a nuisance.
Excuse me, sorry to interrupt, but I just sent you guys the old site plan to take a look at it if you like.
So Tom, that makes perfect sense to me, and I get that. Although I would be open to the argument that the private nature and the cul-de-sac dead end nature of the street, mitigates that to an extent, in the sense that no one's driving through here. It's just who lives here, and then it's kind of a private sector choice. But the concept makes perfect sense to me, and certainly open to the idea of rethinking this.
Well, I think you could also, couldn't you use if you came in up there with the 2-inch cherry, couldn't you also use and designate the driveway itself as the beginning of the conservation easement access?
Yeah.
Roadway, so it could serve a dual purpose. And then of course branch off from the driveway and the pad in the back to the access point that you need. So I don't see that as something that thwarts this, where we have to have a separate path for the easement access. I think shared duty would be perfectly fine.
It destroys less lawn that way too, if they ever have to go access it.
Exactly.
Or part of the driveway, then the lawn.
I think the homeowner would actually prefer it, frankly, if there were ever a need for maintenance and access.
So I think that Eldad, you raise, I mean, this is getting very interesting to me, because whether this is a private cul-de-sac or not, it's still part of the community. And if we think about the Reader's Digest residential section that we are still in the process of doing the final applications for, that also is a private development with a private roadway. It's 90 units, and in the beginning, there was a plan that showed garage doors at the front of buildings, at the fronts of buildings, and we worked pretty hard to turn that around and get alleys and to do it differently. And we had no problem exercising our authority in the process to put that forward and to use what tools we could to get the developer to turn that around for the sake of community character. Now, this is only one, and I think that was the right thing to do. This is only one building in what is it? How many units are off of this cul-de-sac? 1, 2, 3, right?
Three houses.
So it's one building among three. Maybe it's not that big a deal, but I think the principle, is still a sound one.
And, I don't know, without getting philosophical, but the principles of private versus public, it almost makes it look like the private gets a special consideration because they're private, and private only comes usually with a certain level of development, more affluent. And I wouldn't want it to make it look like that there's benefits being given to that.
Well, I don't know if it's a benefit to have the garage in the front. To me, it would reduce.
Well, if the garage stays in the front and we're not adhering to other principles throughout the community, it does kind of make it if we're not moving the garage on the side because it's a private driveway, I kind of see that as a benefit from the private road.
I see it as a reduction in the value of the house.
Okay, sure.
Well,
Has this gone before the ARB?
I don't believe so.
Okay.
If it's and just by extension,
This is just-
if it's a reduction in the value of the house, it's a reduction by extension in the value of the neighborhood.
Yeah, this will go to the ARB as part of the building permit process.
And I think the ARB fairly consistently likes to see garages facing away from the street. My understanding. So I don't know if we write a memo to them or just the applicant just take a look at it and maybe as an alternative, take a look at it and come in higher on the cul-de-sac and something closer to what we saw before.
I would say that we not punt this one to the ARB, because here we're talking about site plan.
Right.
Consequences of site planning that get to architecture. They just deal with architecture. I think it's our responsibility to take the lead here and let them follow up doing what they do.
Also,
Fine.
too, excuse me, Chairman. Also, I note the older plan does show the driveway partially used to gain access to the stormwater basin as well, like you guys brought up before. Is a good idea.
Good.
Right, well,
I did send you the plans, by the way, guys, if you want to look at them.
Yes.
Great. Alan, if you could take a look at that alternative, I think would help us.
Sure. I think what my preference would be to take a look at the having the garage so it's not facing the cul-de-sac. And then
Right.
we'll figure out where we put the drive, because I'm still concerned about the slope. I think here this is probably, even 4 feet of grade change inside of 60 feet or so is a fair amount. It really can be on a driveway.
Okay.
It's 8% slope, almost straight. I'm just, my concern is just that. But I think we could take a look at seeing what we can do about. I think the main concern, what you're expressing, is really just the location of the garage with respect to the street.
The orientation of it.
And
Orientation.
figure out how the driveway works within that.
It's the orientation of it.
Right, I understand.
Right.
Correct. So I think
Good.
we'll see what works. when we look at that
Okay.
modification.
All right. Any other questions at this time on either application at this point? If not, are we prepared to move it forward to a public hearing with the additional information that we'll see from Alan? It seems to me that it's ready.
Yep.
Yeah, I think so.
Okay. So Felicia, I know you're here somewhere on the list. What's the cutoff for the next for a public hearing for this application?
So if we're going to go with the July 7th, it was June 15th, sorry, July 21st would be the next meeting, and the submission date would be June 29th.
Does that sound reasonable, Alan?
Yeah, I suppose it's tight, but
Is that our last meeting of the summer?
Yes.
It is.
because there's no
The
meeting
next-
in August.
The next meeting would be
meetings
September 8th
Okay.
with the submission date of August
Yeah.
17th.
Right.
So it was July 21 with submission of June 29.
Right.
Okay, we'll endeavor to make that.
Okay.
Bob,
Schedule your-
we're going to continue to handle these as two different applications, right?
Correct.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, so
Alan,
there'll be need to notice that way.
maybe you could move forward with number one and then number two. If it gets too tight, you can do it a little later.
Good point.
Sure. Yeah, I would agree. There's a lot fewer items on lot number one.
Yep.
Thank you. That's a good point.
You're welcome.
Okay. So we'll see you soon or later.
Thank you so much. I appreciate everyone's
Sooner
comments.
and later.
Very good. Okay,
Thank you.
thanks so much.
Okay.
The next thing I want to move, we'll just change the order here just a little bit. Nick is chomping to go get his ice cream now. So this is a referral from the town board. And this is the local law referral, the moratorium to extend the moratorium that we have for the Chappaqua Business Hamlet for the study that's going on. And this is, I guess, a proposal for extension for another 6 months. So Nick, is there anything that we need to be concerned with or I know.
No, I would.
Mhm.
Right, I would just note the original moratorium was adopted November 2018. It's been adjourned twice. It currently expires on June 30th. There is a concern expressed in case law about moratoriums being extended. That concern, however, is generally valid when there's no action being taken towards implementing the changes that you're preserving the status quo to protect against. So in this case, the town has taken, as you can see in the local law itself, it details the steps the town has taken in the intervening 6 months. Significantly, it made a determination of significance under SECRA in January, adopting a positive declaration. And then it held 4 separate scoping sessions or public meetings to receive comment, as this board well knows, on the scope for the generic environmental impact statement, and adopted the generic environmental impact statement scope on April 28th, and then requested that the planning consultants, with all due speed, implement the draft of the generic environmental impact statement, and those steps are being undertaken. And of course, with the pandemic, that will delay it in some respects in terms of like traffic analysis.
Right.
But certainly another 6 months is appropriate, and Sabrina and town staff and consultants are working to make sure that this is the final extension, or at least if there's another extension, it's going to be for a lesser period than 6 months. So in my opinion, the town has taken all appropriate steps, and it's warranted to continue the moratorium.
Okay. Good. So it's a referral. So it's something that we vote on, but we, I guess, do we want to send a memo to the town board supporting the local law and the extension of the moratorium?
I just have a quick question. Do we know of any objections or concerns, complaints, comments on this extension?
The town board's going to hold its public hearing. I believe it's on the 29th. We have not received any. I'm not aware of any. Sabrina, who has more of a contact with the development community, would be in a better position to answer that.
No, there have been no objections to the moratorium. Everybody is very anxious to see the new code, to have the environmental impact analysis regarding the new code. It is expected, I would hope, by August or even early September of this year. There has been no objection, and this I would presume would be the last extension that the town board would be considering, because if the timelines are adhered to, they would have the analysis early fall with consideration of the legislation by the end of the year.
Very good, thank you.
And again, as Nick mentioned, we have had the COVID-19 pandemic shutdown. So there's not much that the construction folks could have been doing in terms of physical work during the shutdown. I think construction was just open, phase one a couple weeks ago.
Right.
And even that was on a limited basis. So I don't think anyone really lost that much during this last time. And to Nick's point, I think we've made some good progress in the same 6-month extension. So are we okay? Can we direct staff then to put together a short memo just outlining our support for the extension of the moratorium?
Okay by me.
Okay by me.
Okay,
Yep.
do you want to adopt a motion to that extent? Is there a motion for that?
Motion?
Second.
We have to do a roll call. Felicia, you want to call off the folks and we'll take the vote?
Bob,
Yes, yay?
okay. Greg,
Yay.
Tom, hello,
Yes, sorry, I was muted.
okay. Eldad
Yes,
and Dick,
Aye.
Okay, motion's carried. Good. Very good. Well,
Great.
thanks a lot, Nick. See you
Well,
soon.
thank you very much. I'm gonna go get
Yep.
sprinkles on my ice cream, so thank you.
Dropping by.
Have one for me.
Boy, talk about a guy rubbing it in, Clinton.
See you, Nick.
Okay, take care. Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Right on. All right, we come now to our next item, and this is the decision, and we have a proposed resolution on Bakowski, 23 Heathcote Drive, the application for a lot line adjustment at 23 Heathcote Drive. So, okay. So during the middle of this last week, when I first saw the first draft, and I think I shared it with everyone, I just sent a note to Sabrina and we worked together on some language. I thought it was important on this particular lot line to make sure that we leave some footprints and distinguish this particular application from the usual lot line changes that we see. Normally, the lot line changes we see are de minimis. Very often, they are done really to at the mutual agreement of two adjacent property owners. Very often, it's really to improve the subdivision. So this was a little bit different, and we had some issues from neighbors and concerns from neighbors. There's a little bit more hair on it, and in some cases, you know, I think some of us think there's quite a bit more hair or potential hair on it. So I just want to make sure that people are satisfied in going through it, because if we've missed anything, now's the time to put it in. You know, we're searching a little bit. Clinton prepared a memo on the neighboring property, but we've heard from the neighbors that there was some history in connection with these lots behind the front lots. I think we would all agree that whatever that history was and whatever the intentions were not clearly articulated. So I just wanted to make sure that we leave enough benchmarks and snags in here so that people will realize that we had talked about this, that there were some concerns. They're perfectly free to dismiss them later on, but at least they are aware of them and they understand why we took so much time and care in connection with what normally looks like just a simple lot line change.
I would suggest that instead of snags, we're alerting people.
Right. Yep. Much better wording. Thank you. So, do you want to run through it and see if there are any issues? I mean, I'll tell you, one of the issues I have is, and I'm not so sure it gives the right flavor. You know, and I think, Tom, you need to speak to this as well when I mention it, but on the very first page, and it's lines 44 and 45, you know, normally a lot line change is done to bring something within development coverage, the scope of development coverage. This is a situation where there is a, you know, fairly substantial overdevelopment in terms of coverage, and we've seen this before where people apply these band-aids. We had that lot out west where they I think was off of Old Roaring Brook Road and attached a very odd looking piece of property in a wetland to make sure they had enough coverage. So we're careful about that, but is that really the appropriate language here? I leave it really for discussion. If people think it's appropriate, that's fine. If not, fine, or maybe we drop it down later on. As a consequence, you know, the development coverage is now in compliance. I don't know if I really would call it a whereas clause where it's something that we are really targeting and looking at. I think it's almost a consequence if we do the lot line.
Bob, I would like to tell you that the board has made lot line adjustments, not for development coverage, but because people wanted better play areas or whatnot. You know, there have been instances. So I don't want the board to believe that they're only being made for coverage requirements.
Oh, no, of course not. Of course not.
But Bob does cite I think Bob's reference to that other, I forget the name of it, but that other application is accurate, that was done specifically to get the
correct
in line.
Mm-hmm.
Correct. Yeah, that's not to say that you haven't done lot line changes for coverage.
Good, thank you.
Right, right.
Bob, is
So
your point?
is it?
Sorry, Sabrina.
Go ahead.
Just it
No,
seems
it's
like
okay.
your point is that the bringing the development coverage into compliance with the code is sort of a secondary consequence and not really the purpose of the action. And so listing it up top here seems almost like there's like a noble cause in a sense, and you wouldn't want to give that message. Is that the issue?
Yeah,
that's your point, right?
It's subtle, and that is my point, exactly. It's not really necessarily a goal in this particular case, but it is, after all, it is a consequence, and it helps us in the end. But it seems to me to elevate it as one of the goals. It's a subtle difference, but I think that might be overstating it.
I think
again, it might give a mixed message for what we're trying to do later on in our resolution, which is distinguish this from others and making sure that, as Dick said, we are alerting people to some of the other issues.
So, Bob, if I
may.
Hey, just Sabrina, I'm sorry, just one in reference to this. It's either stated as a planning board objective to get the numbers to work, or the applicant's objective to get the numbers to work. And there's a big difference between those two things. And unless I'm mistaken, Bob, you would prefer to be certain that it not appear as though it's our objective to get those numbers to work.
Correct.
Thank you.
Correct.
I think it's a good point.
Sorry, Sabrina.
No, it's okay. I was going to suggest, kind of be a little bit more proactive and suggest that a secondary reason that you folks are seeing this lot line change is to provide the applicant the ability to locate an accessory use on that secondary lot. So removal of the lot line allows an accessory use to be placed on that lot, whereas without removing the line, they couldn't put anything on that lot. And so maybe we want to include in the whereas clause, on line 36, that says the proposed application is for removal of the rear western property line of the tax lot to create one single lot consisting of 3.67 acres to allow implementation of an accessory use at some point in the future.
Well, I think we should not do that, because I think at that point that really changes the application. And then I think it triggers some of the needs for some of the studies at this time because it now blends it from more than just a lot line to something that we can anticipate. Now, the applicant may or probably has something in mind, but again, we have segmented this in a fashion so that it is really just a lot line. We've done the protections. So if we're really going to include this and say this is being done to permit that application which has not been filed, I think we're starting to blend a little bit too much. And then I start to think, well, gee, then we really need to take a look at the wetland study at this point, whereas I think would be premature and inappropriate to ask the applicant to do that at this point without an application.
And I think that there are limitations on going from the existing 1 acre lot back into the newer piece that makes it like a T, in that if you're going to construct anything back there that's heavy, you're going to wreck the septic system. So in that there isn't an easy way to get around everything, and there's a lot of trees back there. I'm sure everybody's driven down the road and taken a look, but on Heathcote, you can't see through to where the other houses are. On another street, like I guess it's the farm road, whatever it's called, and so it's really heavily wooded. And to me, we have some built-in features that protect us in that, since it is heavily wooded, at least it seems to me from my looking at it, that a big tree permit's going to be needed to do anything back there, and the trees are going to have to be planted someplace else. And we should just alert people that we're not really interested in putting money into the tree bank for something that is an accessory. And I take it that an accessory use is has a wide definition, from a building to a swimming pool to a tennis court. Yes, Sabrina, or no?
Yes, no, absolutely.
Yes, no.
So then, well, what you're saying is true. There is a wide application of accessory use. I'm not sure if the board would like to remove the whereas statement that it talks about bringing it into compliance with development coverage, but in these applications that do involve development coverage, that is usually a statement that is made as a reason for the change.
Well, then we can make it a statement if there's a history. I mean, it's. But I agree, it's not a whereas.
Well, we could put in just whereas as a consequence of the proposed lot line change, this would bring the development coverage into compliance.
Cioli, there's the chair.
Oh, your microphone's muted, right?
Did I miss something? Someone trying to speak? I hope I'm not speaking over someone.
No, Alan's mic was on by accident. He was talking.
Oh, okay, okay. Does that make any sense? I mean, it's a very subtle issue, I think. This is not monumental, but it has no impact on the approval or disapproval of the action. But it just seems to me that it's something that sets a tone that is inconsistent with some of the things that we're doing later on in the resolution.
It makes sense, Bob.
I added the suggested language. Would you like me to read it to the board? I said, whereas insert as a consequence of the proposed lot line change, strike through would bring this, add the development coverage into compliance with the code.
Fine. I'm okay with that.
Okay.
Yep.
All right, cool.
I had a comment on page 2, and this would be line 28. I would insert the word mature in between existing and neighborhood.
The existing mature neighborhood?
Yeah.
Okay.
And again, the reason for that is it goes to more of a sense in terms of Tom's comment about the quality and nature of the neighborhood and the potential impact with more than one of these lot line changes on the feel, texture, appearance of the neighborhood. Again, very subtle,
Okay,
but
no worries.
I think it's, whatever.
Okay.
And also on page 2, this is really a question in the area of, say, lines 45 or 48. And this, Sabrina, is a question, I guess, for you and Bob. Do we also want to tie in this point, some language that the clearing, grading, limit lines, and not just as we discussed, but also as set forth on a map or a plat? Do we
Yeah.
put that in here later, or do we do that later on? But it seems to me, the more often we do it, the more likelihood someone might actually look at it.
I would put it on the plat and have it as a condition prior to the plat signing like we normally do.
Right.
I think I would go further and give a narrative of the lot lines, of the clearing and grading lines, because in this case, it's really very simple. As I recall, they go up from the clearing and grading lines below until it hits the northern or the far western setback line.
You can have a declaration, Bob, you can have a declaration with the meets and bounds in it describing it, plus put it on the plat and the resolution.
Right. Okay.
I like that.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea. Thank you, Clinton.
If it's on a map, that's pretty clear.
Yeah. Yeah.
And let me just make sure after saying it, that I understand it. The lines will go straight up from the setback lines of Lot A, straight up to the setback line of Lot B. So this lot will be rectangular. This lot will have rectangular development rights.
Right.
Yeah,
That's correct. And like I said, they usually submit a map, which I think Peter Gregory had done in draft. So I think with all those items in there, we should be all on the same page, and there it is right there. Thank you, Peter.
And he okay.
It's a little different than what Clinton just said.
Yes,
Yeah,
it is.
I was.
Yeah, we started just to remind folks, we started with the language of describing it in the resolution, and that was taken out because we decided to have the applicant submit the plan and to recommend that it would be placed on the plat. I think Bob Cioli's suggestion to put it in a declaration would suffice. We have never, at least since the time I've been with the town, kind of did a meets and bounds description of a clearing and grading limit line in a resolution. We've always referred to a plan.
I agree with the Sabrina. It should be in the declaration, right?
Okay.
Right. I made reference on that line, Bob, as you requested. I have edited by saying on line 48, within a clearing and grading limit line as discussed and set forth on the final subdivision plat by the planning board.
Perfect.
On page 2, I have some word issues.
Sure.
Okay. Where on page 2?
I'm not gonna tell you. Line 27 is an easy one. Whereas the planning board, take out the word with, I think, don't you?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Let's go up to line 22, where I have 2 on one line. We say that it closely resembles a flag lot. Well, I don't think it closely resembles a flag lot. I don't know what a better word is. Then we go on and say the lot has many of the characteristics, and then we mention just one, the extension east and west. So I'm a little confused as to, how to really word this, that it almost seems like we're saying it is a flag lot.
But it's not a true definition of a flag lot.
We don't give much.
That's why I think Sabrina put in resembles as opposed to is.
Yeah. Well,
right. It's not.
Yeah, but
we can get rid of the word closely.
Excellent. That was my suggestion. Gonna be. All right. And then I would say that instead of saying the lot has many of the characteristics, I would say something to the effect that the lot has one serious characteristic, in that it extends east and west. Because we
One
don't have
primary characteristic.
very good
Can we say
primary.
primary?
Yeah,
Primary or important, whatever, whatever.
I said the lot has one primary characteristic.
I like it. Thank you. I'm done.
Okay, good. I have a question on page 3, we're waiving jurisdiction, and Sabrina Clinton, help me on this. What are we waiving jurisdiction from at this point? Seems to me we're retaining a lot of jurisdiction in that the applicant would have to come back to the planning board. So I've gotten confused at this point.
Because there's a lot line change is waiving jurisdiction over requiring a preliminary and final subdivision. Because it is a lot line change, you are doing both in one action.
Perfect. Okay, got it.
Correct.
And
Yeah,
it
your
also-
retention. Go ahead.
Go ahead, Sabrina.
I was going to say your action, you're retaining the jurisdiction you're retaining is regarding future review.
Right. Perfect. Okay, got it.
And the other thing it does is it just gives the chairman more things to do because he has to sign the final plan.
No, but it's very appropriate because, it expedites this whole process to the extent it's expedited for the applicant. That's fine. That's good. That's great.
All right.
Any other comments?
Yeah, I had a question on page 5, note 17, so line 31. It almost seems at this point, maybe it's just the tense, I don't know. I just want to make sure that we're putting off the submission of a completed wetland delineation at some future point if an application is filed. It almost seemed like this was inserted and sounded like it almost had to be done now, but I guess it's prefixed with the following note should be added to the final subdivision plat.
You think what, Bob?
No, that doesn't relate to that. I think, Bob, you raised a very good question. Submit to the environment a completed wetland delineation method consistent with the absence of wetlands associated with any future permit.
Right.
We should add that after wetlands.
Right. It seems like it would impose it now, whereas that's not the case. We're not doing that.
Good catch.
Yep.
Okay. Anyone else? Any questions? I had one other, but I can't read my handwriting now, so I have no idea what it was.
Golly.
Anyone else? Anything?
Yeah, so Bob,
Sure.
Guys, it's been, geez, I don't know how many years, but I can only remember, and I can't remember which one, but it was a long time ago, only one application I voted no on. And I think this is going to be the second one. And it's because I just don't think that we're doing our job here. I don't think that we're taking the sufficient amount of examination of the conditions that exist beyond the boundaries of this lot and the consequences of this lot line change. I think could dramatically for the neighborhood itself gives the potential for dramatic change in the character of that road. And I'm not suggesting that this particular applicant has any plans to have such, to do the kind of development that this larger lot would allow it to do, but it essentially puts into play development rights that don't exist now. So, and development rights which far exceed the character of the neighborhood. And if it were just this lot, one might say, well, maybe it's just this one lot, but it's not. These lots which constitute the green area that the forest back there that Dick talked about and that I talked about earlier, and that the wetlands within, which may or may not be there, that has Dennis concerned, they're like, I think, 5 or 6 or 7. My count was there are 7 lots that are in this category, right? That constitute that green space. And if we approve this lot line change, it will be impossible to disapprove any others in this area. And before we open that door, it seems to me that we need to do some real considered thinking about what the consequences of that might be. And I think that you could have 3 or 4 of these lots that all of a sudden become twice as big as they are, which dramatically increase the development rights on those properties, and would significantly impact the neighborhood. There is no obligation, unless I'm mistaken, Clinton, you could help me on this, important that I not get this wrong. But as far as I understand, there's no obligation for the town to grant this request. And before we grant this request and then have it be very, very difficult for us to not grant subsequent requests, I think we really ought to look at the impact to the neighborhood and to this green area, which I believe is a really terrific community resource. So I'll be voting no.
You are correct that there is, in theory, no obligation on the planning board to grant this request. Mr. and Ms. Bachowski could take a Article 78 appeal of your decision, and I don't know how a court would rule, but you are not obligated by anything that I've seen, by the deeds or anything else, to grant this approval.
Obviously, I believe we have a larger obligation here to the community, and to understand that and how we deal with these lots in here, and come back to this within the context of that examination.
To Tom's point, is if the other 7 lots, do they have a configuration that would allow people to tap into them and expand like this one? Or is this one special?
No, well, you could look at the plat plan. They're pretty much of the neighborhood. You go on the GIS site that we have, and it's all right there. They're different sizes, right? Because they're different lots, but it's essentially the same thing.
Gotcha.
Some are bigger, some are smaller, but they're all landlocked, and they're all adjacent to lots which actually have street frontage. And those are the lots that constitute this 20-some acres of green space in there.
Well,
I certainly,
think that,
go ahead, I'm sorry, Dick, please.
I think that we've made a decent step to controlling the development capabilities in these T lots, if you will, in that we've limited where things can be done to roughly, I don't know, 35, 40% maybe, say 40% of no, it's even less. It's more like 30% of the entire T. And the vegetation is exceedingly dense, so that people, let's say there's a swimming pool put on what's labeled Lot A in what's in front of us, it's going to be very difficult for the houses on the other side or on Caddy Corner or any direction to see it. The loss, the way we have to control it would be, hey, we're not going to let you just chop down trees. You can't do any, you're just going to have to get a permit, and we're going to be tough on it. Is the way I would go forward with it, to see how it works. Tom, I respect the opinion that it's better not to jump into something, when there's something that could really go awry. But on the other hand, I think we have to take a look at what's in front of us, and we can't delay things forever.
Well, nobody's delaying anything forever. I'm not certain
Okay,
that this,
delay it for some substantive period of time.
well, I don't know what that would be.
Sure.
It seems to me that prudence calls for a larger examination. First of all, these are not all T lots. It's important to actually look at the neighborhood and the lot configurations. Secondly, it's not just a matter of somebody putting in a swimming pool. We have increased the development rights on this lot to the extent that some future homeowner could come in and say, well, you know what, in front of some future planning board or in front of this one, and say, you know what, I just want to put an addition onto this house, which is twice as big as the house right now. And unless I'm mistaken, Clinton, there is nothing in anything that we can write into our resolution that says you can't do that, because the zoning allows it.
That's
And
correct.
that would be true for every one of these lots that are in this category, in this corridor. You can see the lot lines you can see the lot lines at the top of the page of those lots that actually join this lot, that also join lots that are on Cowden Lane. And all of those lots could presumably be joined, and you would have the development rights that would just explode. And if everybody did it, it might not be so bad, because then you've got a neighborhood of big buildings. But look at the books on the bookshelf back here. There are a couple dozen of them on the history of suburban development, and they go way, way back to the very first suburban developments that set the paradigm. And there are textbooks that take you right up to current day practices. And this would be an anomaly in just about every single one of those models. It seems to me, before we just look at this page and say, well, we're going to go ahead and draw these lines today, and we are going to assume that we're going to put together a patchwork coat of an application that has these little nuances of language in it, that we're actually going to control the future that way. And we're not. I mean, I just know we're not, because I've been in many of these meetings where an applicant comes in and he's got development rights, and all we can do is pick away at the edges. And I'm not suggesting that's always a bad thing, because they have development rights. But these development rights we are expanding have consequence to the neighborhood, and I think we need to do some planning before we open that door. And I thought that that's what we do here. And so that's how I feel about it, and I'm going to be voting no.
Hi, this is the applicant.
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Sure. Yes, we can. Thank you.
Look, I really, going into this, was on the impression this was a much more simple process, and so we don't have legal representation. So I apologize for not, coming off with that perception here. But I guess I totally appreciate the effort of representing the town and the neighbors, and I do feel like this is our fourth meeting scheduled, third that we've been heard when we had to get adjourned. And it does feel like every single time it is getting more and more restrictive. I do think one thing I want to make sure we're not forgetting about is, by agreeing to this lot line merger, we are actually restricting what we can do to the lot behind the neighbors' houses. It's my understanding that as the lot is now, I could get a tree permit to take down trees behind neighbors' houses. Technically, I'm not trying to be a smart aleck here. I'm just saying technically. And by agreeing to this, we are limiting to be able to go behind the neighbor. We would have to go back in front of the planning board to go behind the neighbors' houses, and the back of the lot is also, we're creating a clearing and grading limit. So it does feel like we are, and we the neighbors were on the call last 2 weeks ago and agreed to this, and I spoke with them. So I don't know, I totally appreciate you guys are doing a fantastic job, and I felt like this was already fairly restrictive of what we should do, but it's fine for our purposes. We have no intention of going behind anyone's lots. But you know, it did feel like this is technically more restrictive than it is today as far as clearing green space. And if there is any concern about the other neighbors' lots, one, they've agreed to it, and two, we'd have to come back to the planning board. As far as putting in an addition onto the house, you have to remember this: the septic is in the backyard. You'd have to move the septic field to do that. So there's a lot of other complications that are already inherent in this lot to do something like that.
That's all, if I can respond, that's all very fair. And I completely understand the situation you're in, and I do sympathize with it. I really, really do.
Thank you.
But I'm telling you, I have seen both before us on the planning board, and also just in the neighborhood in town. I've seen, you know, more what you would think would be unreasonable investments than somebody deciding to actually move a septic field so that they can move someplace else on the lot in order to go ahead and put a bigger building on it. I mean, that kind of thing is not actually that big a deal in the context of a big development or a renovation of significant investment. So I'm not suggesting that these are any things that are on your plate to do. And I'm sure that if they were, we would be having a conversation about it in order to be sure that we were doing something that might facilitate it if we could. So there's no suspicion of any of your intentions here. It's more to the fact that the lines, the hardest lines on this page right now, the ones that have the most meaning, are the lot lines. Everything else is actually negotiable, and we negotiate them pretty much all the time, and the zoning board negotiates them all the time. And that's as it should be, because you want to be flexible. But in the consequence that where this could go, if this becomes the first of all, for this particular lot and the impacts in the neighborhood in the future, if somebody else comes in and decides to tear down this house and put a much bigger house back on lot A, there's nothing that says that they can't do that. And that's a consequence of, you know, the configuration of the lot with the frontage on Heathcote. So those things are possible. I'm not saying that they are likely, but I'm saying that I think we need to understand that that's not only possible here, but it's possible on all the lots that abut this greenway that are front on Heathcote and on Cowden Lane. And the consequence of that could be something that one day we say, oh my goodness, why did we let that happen? I still believe that that the members of this planning board, maybe I'm wrong, but I don't think that all of us have really looked at the lots and the plots in a way that put us in a position to understand the consequence, because we've actually never had a conversation about it, a real conversation about it, with that drawing in front of us and with the consequences of what this might mean one day. So absent that conversation, it's hard for me to have a position on this particular application that makes me feel comfortable I'm doing the right thing.
Hey, Tom.
Yes, sir.
So in my short time on the board, I've come to really respect your voice, and you always make great points, and that's no different here. A couple thoughts, a couple questions. What would a larger thinking on this issue, what would that look like for you and for us? Like, what would that actually mean?
You mean what would constitute a conversation and examination to get there?
Right. Like, what would you like to see happen here
on this lot?
Well, you're suggesting that we as a board need to kind of zoom out a little bit and look at this stretch, and so what would that be? What would that look like?
Well, what I would suggest is that we, I don't know, it seems to me that this would be something that would be led by staff, where we would pull out and we would look at all the properties between Cowden and Heathcote, and look at the, and we could get Dennis involved in looking at the wetlands to see what's there, to have an assessment of what the value of that area is as a woodland, because it is 20 acres. To look at the consequences of if it were true that these lots that front these two roads join with the lots which are now landlocked, what would be the potential consequence to the development of the neighborhood, the design of the neighborhood? And is that a good thing or a bad thing? It's hard for me to know what that would really look like, and what one would say after looking at that, what is the likelihood of this happening, without even having a conversation about it. So it would be pulling back, and it wouldn't be like a 3-month exercise, for goodness sakes, no. But it would be something where we would take a considered look at those issues and have a discussion to decide whether in fact we want to set this as a first step in what might end up being, because once you do this for this one, I don't think you're going to be able to say no to any of the others. And that's what I think that we ought to be, that'd be the nature of it. So it doesn't have to get that technical. I mean, but it needs to be dealing with the planning consequences of it.
So a couple of questions. One, I would like to know if we have that capacity, to do that. And then two, I do understand the concern about setting a precedent, although is it possible that given the existence of the septic system where it is, that we could feel comfortable saying that the next person coming who doesn't have a that there is some kind of justification from the board's part that's sort of defensible here. And 2B, this is something that would be defensible to say that the next person that comes and asks for this, who doesn't have that exact condition and says, hey, you gave it to this guy, why don't you give it to me as well? That we may have some kind of, a leg to stand on. And then 2B is there a way to do these two things in parallel, as sort of to write into the resolution some of our concerns and maybe further ensure that it goes the direction we want, or has to come back to us, while also conducting the larger study in parallel?
Well, I think the first question there that Eldad asked, Clinton, can you help us with that? I mean, I think the capacity issue is two-pronged. I mean, one is just staff, and the other, I think, is legal. Can we pursue such a study when an applicant is merely looking at one lot or two lots and asking for a lot line change? It seems to me that this would be pretty unusual. In my experience, we've never done this before. Frankly, from the standpoint of the applicant, it seems to me it's something that he would have the right to say, hey, that was looked at when this subdivision was done back in 1985. If they didn't document it the way it could have been or should have been, that's the way it goes. But legally, it seems to me that we might be on soft soil if we proceed in this kind of a manner and hold up an application while we try to conduct a new study on an existing subdivision to see what the impacts would be. I'm sympathetic to the issue, and I certainly understand the policy behind it and appreciate it and support it, but I think we're getting a little bit off the beacon here. Maybe you can help us.
What is the beacon, Bob? Forgive me. What's the beacon? Is the beacon to approve this application?
Well, this application, the problem I have with this particular application, frankly, is the horse is kind of out the gate, because as we know, we have another application that's before us, and it's that lot line change, I believe, has already been granted, and now we have an application, or maybe it's in the mix. I'm not sure. Clinton will have to help us on that one, but
it has not been granted.
It has. I'm sorry, Tom. Has or has not?
Clinton, I think it has not been granted. Is that right?
That's correct. It has not been granted.
Right, so it's all part of the same application. So, we have another situation there that obviously is just down the street or, right next door, close by. So, that is the one that really concerns me more, frankly. It's none of this applicant's problem. I certainly understand what you're saying and appreciate it. I personally feel that the limitations and restrictions that we have placed, that we propose to place on this are reasonable, maybe not reasonable to the applicant, but I think they're reasonable, and I think they afford reasonable protection to the neighborhood and to the character of the neighborhood, because the ability to do anything back there is going to be dependent upon the proof that there's no wetland buffer, planting plan, some sort of limited growth, limited development. And you have if you have wetland or wetland-like soils back there, you're going to have some problems proving out a septic area if you're going to move the septic area back there.
That's
So
right.
I
And
think there are a number of constraints in there, and I think what we've done is reasonable. And I think we've heard from the neighborhood, not that that's the be-all end-all, because the neighbors are the current neighbors, and who knows what comes down the future. But I'm less troubled by this because of the conditions that we have imposed with the, I think, agreement of the applicant, and I feel okay with it. I understand your concerns, but I think we've mitigated them, at least in my mind, to the extent that it will not have an adverse impact on the quality and nature of the neighborhood. It could, absolutely could. Anything could happen. Who knows with things as it changes in the future. But I think we've taken reasonable steps, and I think we would be putting out reasonable signals to future people.
Okay, fair enough, Bob. But again, what we put in this resolution today, if there is no water back there, right? If somebody comes in and says they want to put a really big house back on Lot A and tear down the smaller house, I'm not saying the house is so small on Heathcote, but tear down the house on because their tear downs happen all the time.
Right.
And he wants to put a really big house, but there is nothing in this resolution that I can see. We don't even have, unless there's a wetland, unless I'm mistaken in this resolution, unless there is a impact of wetlands, the things that we normally control. If there is no impact to the things we normally control, we don't have a say in that. And it's a matter of right development that would go forward. And it would be, it may not be this board. So the protections that we're putting in place right now, to me, may work very well for the intent of this particular applicant, but seem to me to be pretty anemic for the future. And I understand.
I have a comment on that.
I'm sorry, go ahead, Dick.
It's a small comment. It strikes me that from what Dennis has done in the field is that seasonally the water comes up to the surface of the soil, which makes that land maybe not a wetland, but it certainly is totally useless for a septic field because you just can't have it. This particular parcel, as I recollect from the topo, this area that is been carved out of the new lot, that something could possibly be done there, is 2 feet higher, than the soil at the downstream, if you would, or down groundwater movement area. So I think that we do have an unarticulated, but certainly something that is standard. That is, you got to go and test to see if you have a reasonable soil circumstance that you could put a septic field. I suspect that that the existing septic field would not be acceptable in Lot A, as we call it here. So, and I think it gets worse as you go downstream or down gradient on the groundwater. Now, that's not proven. I think it's better than a speculation, given what we know, but it could vary significantly. So I think I think as Bob has suggested, we do have a lot of things we could do here to make sure that the character of the neighborhood is not destroyed or significantly damaged or even modestly damaged.
Well, I guess I mean, I think all those things that you say are true, Dick, but I also think that they are true in the realm of maybe. These are things we don't know about the wetlands and about the septic fields and, you know, all of those things because they haven't been examined. And if we're proceeding on assumptions of sanguine outcomes, then yeah, I'll vote for it. But I don't think it's responsible to do that because I see the larger consequences to the neighborhood. I don't think we're doing our job. So I don't need to go on and on about this. I've said what I have to say. Thanks for listening, everybody.
So Bob Ciolis just sent an email with a survey from 1986 where these parcels say on them, not a building lot. I know we talked about this in the past, but at Clinton, that's not binding. Is it true? I mean, because part of Tom's concern is that theoretically this could be a tear down and you could build on this rear lot or both the rear and the front lot. So the homeowners have that right. Yes or no?
I'm sorry. I'm sorry, I had a call. What did you say?
So I guess the question is, can you build on these rear lots?
And the answer is you can build. Let me look. I believe the answer was that you could build a residence or accessory structure. But the prohibition of not a building lot standing alone is no effect on the planning board. The cases would look to the covenants, and the covenant said no further subdivision, and the deed restriction said nothing but one residence and accessory building, a garage. So I think that with the current configuration, he would be able to put, Mr. and Ms. Bashowski would be able to put accessory buildings on Lot A. If they chose to, they could demolish their home, move their septic, and build a much larger home because they would have it on a larger lot. I don't know. I'm assuming that the plans would generate something to send them back to the planning board. Maybe not, but I assume it would.
There might be if there were grading issues, the kinds of things that and drainage and so on, the kinds of things that we deal with. I guess it might. I don't know, but it essentially would be matter of right development, and we're not. My reference is not to the existing applicant. My reference is to any future homeowner here.
Right. My sense on this is that, and I understand and appreciate and subscribe to your frustration. It's no laughing matter, but the issue, it seems to me, is what we would be looking to do even after a study or with a study is, in a sense, impose a conservation subdivision on an already existing subdivision. It's the only way that you would ever, I think, be able to set forth limitations on property that is owned by private parties. And I just don't think that legally is possible. I just don't think it's something that can be done, because I don't see how, even if you do the study, we conclude that this is valuable. This 20 acres, we all agree scientifically should not be disturbed. It's a great corridor for vegetation, for wetlands, for drainage, for animals, whatever it might be, everything. But in the end, there are not going to be any limitations other than blocking a lot line, which I really don't think would stand up, unless you had the power of a conservation subdivision and said, here's what we're going to set aside. This cannot be developed. Maybe this was done before we had a conservation subdivision law. Probably was. Then it was a very inarticulate way that that was pursued, or maybe that was the intention. But it seems to me it wasn't done that way, and it just seems to me that we've done what we can do, and I'm not quite sure what the result, to Eldad's point, I'm not sure what the result of that study would be, other than we would be really upset because we knew this was valuable, and all we had to use to limit or mitigate impacts was what we have right now, which is our wetland law, our buffer law, our steep slopes, our clearing, our tree clearing, drainage, etc. Because the subdivision's out there.
No, but Bob, what we do have, which is what is actually on the table right now, is
the lot line.
The
Yes.
lot line.
Mm-hmm.
And you're suggesting that might not be defensible. I think that's not the planning board's. I mean, I think that we do the planning. I would let the lawyers figure out whether that is something that they can defend. And, if Clinton says, forget about it, you're getting the town into trouble, you're going farther than the town wants to contemplate. We appreciate the effort, but this is something which is really not going to work out for the town in the end, and it's not going to work out for the planning board, and it's going to be a lot of pain for everybody. Then I guess that's a strategic conversation that we ought to have. We're not having that conversation tonight, right? We're not having that conversation tonight, so it's hard to put that on the table.
Yeah,
as a reason not to do this.
Mm-hmm.
So again, I've said what I've said, and we should probably just get on with it.
Yeah. Okay, Greg, any thoughts? Dick, any other thoughts? Eldad? Tom and I've kind of monopolized it, so I apologize for that.
I feel I have the same sentiments as both of you. I wish we had Tom. I wish this conversation happened 6 weeks ago.
I tried to raise it.
No, I know you did. No, I remember you brought it up a long time ago, and I was the one arguing this is just a lot line change. Why, looking so deep into this, and as we look deeper and deeper, more it's as you peel the onion, you discover more things. But regrettably, I think we need to move forward. There is one little thing on this diagram that concerns me, and we talked about it on the last application about having a clearing and grading limit line go right up to a neighbor's property line. And this diagram, it does happen on both flanking pieces of property, where theoretically they could be clearing right up to so we might just have to chamfer those edges or something to give a little buffer on the corner. Yeah, right there. And on the other side. But besides that, I think this diagram does a lot to rein in the potential development. Yes, they could take down the big house. Yes, they can move the septic field someplace else. Yes, they could put in a pool. All those things could happen. And I just hate to restrict everything on all these coulds.
Well, the only reason why this goes up to the line is to allow us to provide additional plantings and landscaping with screening up to the property line in that area. There aren't any intentions to build over anything over there. We can't. We have in terms of the structure, we have these setback lines. But as long as we have the ability to go within this area to do landscaping, we can do that or modify that a little bit.
Yeah, like I said, it was a little thing. It wasn't a biggie.
Eldad, anything further?
I understand Tom's point, and to a certain extent, I agree with it. I mean, I do like the idea of kind of thinking in the macro. I just wonder, and right, our concern isn't necessarily with this applicant specifically, but more of precedent and with any future homeowner. So I wonder if there's a way of doing both, of preserving, issues of precedence and also allowing this applicant to go forward with this. I don't know the answer to that, but I guess I'm posing it to the rest of the board. Is there a way to do both?
You certainly, and I'm sorry, I don't mean to speak for Bob here, but you certainly can, by letter to the town, say that you think this stretch of property is worthy of further study based on this application. Now, I do know that there's only one other property on Heathcote that would be subject to this, and that's the Singh property. So once you have dealt with this and dealt with Singh's, there's no more property on Heathcote that can be expanded this way.
Yes, there is. The property to, forgive me for interrupting, Clinton, but on this map, the property to the right of Lot A is subject to this as well. It's a big piece, and I think it goes almost all the way down to the end. And then all the properties on the upper part of the plan, which abut properties at front on Cowden, would be subject to this same or part of the same issue. I think there are 6 or 7 total.
Are the lots also owned by folks who live on either Cowden or Heathcote, as this applicant does and as the Singhs do?
I believe the property to the right, it borders Bedford Road. I believe it is the what was the O'Neill's property, and I believe that it has already been incorporated. I'm not certain about that.
Well, okay.
I do believe it's theirs. And then the Singh property is to the left of this. And then finally on the end, according to the surveys that I've seen, it says association property.
And then there are the properties up on Cowden. To answer your question, Bob, I didn't look at the tax maps to see who owns what up there.
Right.
My assumption was, like this particular condition and the Singh condition, that it would be crazy for anybody to buy these landlocked lots without having street frontage. So my assumption was that they were purchased as 2 lot purchases, one that has street frontage and one that doesn't. And that's just an assumption. So I don't know the answer to your question specifically.
I'm sorry to interrupt because I might be able to answer that question because I know I went back to the email that I wrote on June 4th. And I believe I just simply looked at the GIS map and looked at the back lots.
That's great. Thank you, Dennis.
Oh, I wish I had that ability. You're welcome if but I know that in looking at the GIS map where you're able to just, put the cursor over a lot to see what owner, name, or group pops up. I had lots 24, 28, 29, 30, and 31 totaling approximately 7.5 acres, whereby they were separate wooded back tax lots that were owned by the same entity at a front tax lot. And that didn't include Dr. Singh's application.
So we have the same condition then we have the same potential condition as Tom has pointed or has feared. We might have this in other situations then.
7.5 acres worth, yes.
Right,
and
okay.
Looking at this,
which lots were those?
Again, this was just an ownership comparison where they overlapped. I had 24, 28, 29, 30, and 31. And I made that the Cowden Heathcote corridor, so it could be either road.
Got it. Thank you.
You're welcome.
So back to Eldad's question, to what extent could some of these concerns be mitigated? The concerns which I guess go beyond what the language in the application says right now can be mitigated in the application.
Can I ask a question? Just looking at this lot or at this map, it looks like lot 10 from Cowden Lane. I'm guessing just because of the configuration, but that looks like it was, you know, that's a lot that looks a lot like the proposed lot merge that we're talking about here. And I'm wondering what restrictions they might have from doing what you're concerned about, if anything.
I don't, this is Clinton speaking. I don't know. One of the, in past minutes, I'm sorry, it might have been in the deed, but it referenced that lot as being that shape originally. So I don't know if it was the Cowden Lane Manor House. I don't know if it was the first house and it went all the way back. I don't know. I don't know why it is in the shape it's in. I do know that it wasn't because of a merger of it and the lot behind it.
Okay.
Was there a lot 23? I'm looking at this map. I don't see a 23. And is it possible that 10 had a 23 in the back?
I don't think it did.
Okay.
According to just quickly looking at the GIS, if it helps, it shows that it was sold in 1985 and looks like it was built in 87. So what you're suggesting would have had to have happened within a pretty short window around the time when I guess all of this was sort of being formulated and laid out.
Guys, the map that I circulated to the planning board shows that as lot 7. And it appears to me lot 7 probably was like Clinton. To agree with Clinton, was a pre-existing lot, possibly on a subdivision map that was already built out prior to these lots being subdivided later on. So lot 7 on the Flynn Capital map is an entire lot which starts from HE2 and then goes east, or west, I should say, up to Cowden Road. And that lot is the same as lot 10, which was evidently one whole lot at the time, if that makes any sense.
Okay. Okay, anyone else, any thoughts? If not, I guess we can entertain if there is such a motion to consider the, I'm sorry, someone's trying to speak?
Yeah, this is the applicant. I just wanted to voice that, you know, we bought this lot when we bought this house, we bought it as recognizing it's 2 lots, but looking at it as one piece of property. We are respectful of the neighbors. We thought that the concessions that were agreed to in the last meeting were extremely, we're obviously taking the neighbors and the neighborhoods, you know, their thoughts and their concerns into account. We thought that was fair. I've talked to them since then. Obviously, any new neighbors, you know, would come in understanding what they're getting into. I think this restricts lot 27 that's on the map more than it is existing. And, you know, again, I felt like this was a fair compromise. You know, and I hope that you guys think so as well.
Okay, thank you. I guess we could do one of 2 things at this point. We can, to Tom's point, ask Clinton just to give us, defer this and ask Clinton to give us some sort of legal insight in terms of lot line change case law. Or we can entertain a motion to either approve or deny, you know, adopt the resolution as amended or not. The pregnant pause. Well, I'll make a
think it may
motion
be
to approve the resolution as amended. And then we can vote on that yay or nay, or we can, abstain and defer. Or again, if you'd rather have a motion to defer the resolution and wait till we have information from Clinton, if you think that's appropriate, we can do that.
And how long would it take to get, Clinton, how long would it take to get something that would be helpful to us?
You have meetings,
Every 2 weeks.
2 meetings in July, correct? And then
Right.
I would, considering Mr. Bachowski's patience, I would try to get it out next week.
Clinton, may I ask a procedural question here?
Sure.
Yeah.
There are, Bob puts up 3 options. One, it passes tonight. One, there are essentially abstentions if it's going to be put to a vote, which would, I guess, hold it over in effect. The application could still be a live application and it gets held over. And if correct me if I'm wrong, but let me just give the third one, or it gets voted down. If it gets voted down, does the applicant, if he wants to, if we want to further consider the larger neighborhood here and it gets voted down, does the applicant have to actually start the application process all over again in order to be heard?
He would have to start the application procedure all over again. And for you to reverse the vote and approve it would be quite questionable in these circumstances. The precedent, there's no formal rule of precedent, but the precedent for a board action has got to, there must be changed circumstances in the application for you to adopt a different position. And here you would be going from rejection to approval. And I don't think there would be anywhere near the changed circumstances necessary for that.
Understood.
If there are abstentions or deferrals, those count as negative votes. So it will require 3 pro votes for this resolution to pass. If you don't have 3 yes votes, it will fail.
And of course, the applicant has a certain number of days, if the application fails, to file an Article 78, no matter what we want to do in terms of studies or reconsider.
Tom, is there language that can be put into the resolution that would give you comfort to approve this?
Was that addressed to me, Eldad?
Yeah, sorry. Is there language that could be inserted into the resolution to give you comfort?
No. Wait, strike
can
the
the
no
board-
part, and I'll just say no. So
Can the board do a straw poll to
Can we
see
do a
if
what?
there's support? A straw poll? Just kind of get a feel of the board as to whether or not it's something that you would approve versus deny, and then determine the appropriate course of action?
that's a good idea.
Sure, we can do that. So I guess the straw vote would be whether or not at this point, individual members would be inclined to approve the resolution as amended this evening.
Well, the other straw vote you could put up there is whether there would be a decision to hold over the vote.
Yes.
That would be the first one, and then what the vote would, the straw vote, see what the vote would be.
Would the holdover be so we can have legal advice in a week or so? Is that the holdover? For how long is the holdover?
I think so. I think that's
Okay.
what it would be.
So Clinton had ample time to maybe get back to us before the next meeting, so this applicant could be at the next meeting? Is that the time frame we're talking for the holdover?
I would hope so.
We are talking about scheduling it on the July 7th meeting with the expectation that there would be a legal review memo to you by the end of next week.
Okay.
So I'd like to offer something here that in deference to the applicant, because I'm very, very sympathetic to his position. In deference to the applicant, I would urge us not to vote for a holdover for a legal opinion if we feel that no matter what the answer to that opinion will be, we're going to vote for the application anyway. I mean, I'm guessing that for most of us, the legal opinion about our vulnerability, the town's vulnerability to a significant lawsuit here, is probably not the threshold question, because I'm guessing that most of us are going to vote yes on the application anyway. So I just suggest if that's the case, not to put Clinton and most importantly, the applicant through that process, which would really have no purpose.
That's a
I think that's-
reasonable statement.
Yeah, I think it's a very reasonable statement. I think, Tom, you really framed the legal issue that we would be looking at, so it might not make a difference in what we all conclude. So we can do a straw vote on the resolution as amended, and then if there's a motion, we can consider the resolution. So Eldad, I'll put you're first.
I appreciate that. I would be supportive of the resolution.
Okay. Dick?
I have to agree with Eldad. I think it's complicated. I think that Tom has raised an excellent point that somehow we have to deal with in some shape, form, or manner beyond what I think is really a good set of things that we've got in place, and some positive things that I believe will help dampen down people's desire to build something substantive.
Right. Okay, Greg?
I would support the proposal also.
Okay, Tom?
No.
Okay, and I would be inclined to support the resolution as amended. So again, based on that, I would be inclined to consider a resolution to approve the resolution this evening. Was that right? A motion to approve the resolution.
A motion.
Long night as amended, and we can go from there.
Well, I'd like to have one more amendment, that doesn't have to be, I don't know where it has to go, but I do respect what Tom is laid out, and I think we have to sit down and figure out how we're going to proceed with other properties in this sector. I think we have a reasonable but not maybe perfect situation where we have a reasonable amount of control but not perfect control over the future. And I think we should try and get beyond where we are with this applicant, who has been very cooperative and patient. So that would be I would vote yes then if we can schedule that in sometime in the near term so that we can
That, if I may, Mr. Brownell, it's not part of this resolution, but that would be a memo from the planning board to the town board requesting that an analysis of this area be undertaken, and asking them to put forth the time and effort to have that analysis done. So
Okay.
I think that it can be something that the board can put together in a memo format to the town board requesting such analysis.
Thank you.
Okay. Did someone make a motion for the resolution as amended?
Motion.
Okay. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, roll vote. Felicia, you're back on.
Okay. Bob,
Yay.
Tom,
No.
Dick,
Yes.
Yay.
Eldad,
Yes.
Okay, motion carried. 4-1, and the application is approved subject to those conditions. Good, okay.
Bob,
Yes.
you're not coming through clear.
I mean not to. When it gets to be controversial, I don't do that.
Way to be in control.
Exactly. So there was a 4-1 vote. Obviously, the motion is carried and the application is approved, subject to the limitations that we put into the resolution. So I want to thank the applicant for patience and again, board members for some very, very intelligent, insightful conversation. And again, thanks to staff for all the support on this application. We will get another crack at this, and I'm not quite sure how we're going to do this. This is, we can't get into details on it, but we do have that other application, and Clinton did supply us with a memo in connection with the other application. So please read through that, understand it, and if you have any additional questions for Clinton before we hear that application again, that's different. That one, it doesn't seem as though we have the same degree and level of mitigating factors and controls on it. So, to Tom's point, this is it's a problem.
Is that application on the next agenda?
I don't know. Is it, Felicia?
I'm sorry, which application? I really can't hear you.
Sing. We're
waiting on resubmission.
Okay, so it's not quite.
It's not scheduled yet. No, it is not scheduled yet.
Right. Okay. Very good. We have one other item on our agenda. That's the minutes of the meeting on May 5.
Thank you.
I just wanted to say thank you. Thank you all for your time and patience. I learned a lot from this, and you're all very, very thoughtful, and as you said, very, very talented and educated. So thank you all for your time.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, thank you.
We have the minutes of May 5. I had a comment on page 2, line 24. I would just take out that last clause, but wanted it marked for perpetuity. I'm not quite sure what that means or what it meant or what I attempted to mean, but we can just take it out.
Okay.
Anyone else on page 1 or page 2? I had something on the top of page 3. Dennis, if you're there, correct me if I suggest a correction. It's incorrect, but it seemed to me that you were speaking in terms of in lines 1 and 2 about functions, whether or not these areas displayed any wetland functional qualities, such as flood control in the area. I'm not quite sure it came through correctly, whatever that question was. I think that's what it was. I was asking about functional qualities.
Sorry to take a step back of ignorance. Which project or subject property was that?
Oh,
This
yeah,
one?
that was, turns out it was
This is
this one.
Bachkowski.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
I have a comment on page 2.
Oh, okay.
That's line 3. We say we make a statement that says that identified as well as the wetlands and buffer. I don't think we know that there are wetlands in a buffer. So it said, with regard to the preliminary plat, the section, block, and lot should be identified as well as any wetlands and buffer
Okay.
instead of the.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Was that okay, Dennis? That changed and that question at the very top of page 3 there?
Yes.
Okay. I think in page 4, line 25, I would just insert review and discuss setbacks.
Okay.
I want to go back to page 3.
Sure.
Line 10. Mr. Brownell stated that the site is formerly agricultural land. I would say, I thought I said something that stated that this site is probably formerly agricultural land.
Okay.
Yeah.
Anything else on page 4, anyone?
No, not me.
Page 5, line 15, after the first word this, I would say this history, insert history. Should be looked at carefully. In the line above that 13, I would change it to, let's see, notwithstanding deed restrictions, there may be a reason these properties were left undeveloped and possible. This is just weird. Yeah, just leave that as a sentence. I don't know. It's not really fixable. That's the way it is. You know, when you speak like that, it's just not fixable. Okay. Anyone else, anything? If not, is there a motion to adopt the minutes as amended?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Felicia, want to do the roll call? I guess we have to do this because we're doing this thing by video.
Sure. Bob,
Yay.
Tom,
Yes.
Dick,
Aye.
Greg,
Yes.
Eldad,
Yes.
Okay, minutes are adopted. And unless there's something else, is there a motion?
I have a question. Oh,
Sure.
Tom,
Okay.
Tom, go first.
Greg, I'll go first.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. I have a question for Sabrina and Clinton, and I think that Bob Scioli can help here also. It's about the limit of our authority with respect to subdivision or applications that we have approved for development. And then subsequently, it turns out that the property owner, not necessarily the one who got the approvals, but let's say it is the one who got the approvals, starts to do significant changes to the property, pre-grading, building things that go beyond outside the text of the resolution. What's the procedure here when the town comes in and investigates and finds that this has happened and requires the homeowner to make adjustments and changes to rectify what's being done? Does the planning board have the authority or the position to review that action to be sure that is in conformance with the original application?
In theory, no, because there is no application before you. I would imagine that it would be somebody in the planning department or in the engineering department who is telling the applicant what must be done. And perhaps he or she should speak to someone from the planning board, probably the chairman, possibly the whole board, and clarify any confusing points. But it should be really straightforward. I mean, you approved a subdivision and a lot and a, I'm sorry, it's late and my mind is shot. You approved a subdivision and a, what do you call it when it's
Site plan.
site plan. Thank you.
Site plan.
And it showed a house, and it's you can build a house or you can build something different. But I think it's if they are told to take down what's there and put up what plans were approved, that's what they should be told, and that's what they should do.
That's what they are. That's what they are told. If something is in violation to a planning board resolution, the applicant is required, or the property owner is required to put it back in accordance with the resolution. If they fight us on that, it then goes into court proceedings, and oftentimes the courts will then say revisit with the planning board and send them back to you. But staff are charged with implementing the decisions that you make as a board and making sure that property owners follow suit with those decisions.
Okay.
But at what
thank you.
point does something go beyond a field change to something that would trigger a requirement from staff to say, you need to file a revised application?
That happens all the time. It's happening right now in a few applications that they go well into the clearing and grading limit line. And when we find out about it, for some reason, it always happens to be just me to find out and be the bad guy. But we always tell the applicant they have to come back to the planning board to amend the site development plan for the clearing and grading limit line. It's happening right now out on Brandywine.
Yes.
But those are.
Yeah,
but
you
let me
will see
just
that soon.
Clarify, those are for standing applications. That's not for some property owner who's out of our part of the process and ends up getting caught doing something which is beyond the text of the resolution. That, I think that's what Clinton's talking about.
No, here's the thing. So let's just play it out. If you guys approve of a subdivision with a clearing and grading limit line, and that clearing and grading limit line is close to the house, the developer subsequently exceeds that clearing and grading limit line. They have already transferred the property by the time it's going for a C of O, or maybe it's a different person building the house. When they come in for a building permit for an accessory use on the property, they are usually held accountable for exceeding that clearing and grading limit line, whether it is the actual developer or it is the new property owner that does it. So because the town requires permitting for pools, sheds in some cases, we have a whole laundry list of permits. When they come in, we always compare it with what it should be as approved by the planning board in relation to a subdivision.
Yeah, got it. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, we spend quite a bit of time in the building department looking for those types of things during review of a building permit. And a lot of times we find out it has to go back to the planning board for that reason. Many reasons. Clearing and grading, building coverage, environmental reasons.
The specific case I'm talking about, which I'm not going to cite, is one where there was no application in front of anybody. It's just that somebody got caught.
And that's a violation that they have to have a cease and desist, and they, either correct the violation by going to the responsible entity to get approvals, or they go to court.
Thank you. Thank you. That's all I had, Bob. Bob's
Bob
gone.
left.
That's fed up. Enough already.
What happened to Bob?
We got
Come
no
back.
chairman.
Bob,
Looks like Dick, you're in charge.
He's got a backdrop to hide himself.
I think that Greg had something he wanted to ask.
Yeah, I had a simple question. Should I wait for Bob to come back?
No.
No,
I guess it's a procedural question. If we have an applicant that needs discussion, let's use the past applicant we just had that needs planning board and legal. Can we go into an executive session and have private conversations to hash some things out? So maybe we can start thinking about that on some of these applications that have some hair on it.
Well, but recognize you cannot go into executive session to hash things out.
Okay.
Go into executive session primarily as a planning board to get legal advice. That is a perfectly appropriate planning board, a perfectly appropriate basis for an executive session. It's not really an executive session. It's something that you can do. But if we did that in the last application and I gave you advice, as I was intentionally withholding saying anything because I did not want to breach the confidentiality of the position. But if you went into executive session and I told you that yes, you're pressing the line, you may be liable, you may be lawsuit, et cetera, and then you start saying, well, gee, I don't know if it matters, and Eldad says, yes, I think we're very vulnerable, and Bob says, no, nothing to worry about, and Tom says, whatever Tom says, that's not.
Nobody knows what Tom says.
Yeah.
Wait,
Well, we have an
say that
idea.
again, Clinton. I missed your last sentence, Clinton. You said that.
That would not be executive session.
What would that be then?
It would be a
Matt.
violation because it should be in permanent. It should be in the open session.
So since it wasn't sunshine related, sunshine law related, we couldn't really have the conversation.
Exactly.
Oh, we just lost Clinton.
Issue of liability, but if you got it into, if these conversations always devolve back to, yeah, but if he moves his pool, it'll be okay. That's not executive session material.
Okay, thank you.
You can ask in a meeting if, you can ask counsel at the point in the meeting where you think that it might be executive session, if this is appropriate to go into executive session, and counsel will advise you.
Yeah. And I'm perfectly happy to advise you. Either at the meeting or an executive session.
Gotcha.
Thank you. Okay.
Okay.
Okay. Is there a motion then to close the meeting?
So move.
Second,
Second.
all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Yes.
Aye.
Yay.
See you in a couple
Good night,
weeks.
everybody.